we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has shaken our communities across the world in many multi-layer manner of ways across the globe, like no previous event in history ever. So family therapists, given the fact that the core of our work is with systems, finding ourselves living and working amidst a society in chaos is what we found as family and systemic therapists. Now, my guest today, I'm very privileged to have him here with me, is Dr. Harry Aponte. He's a family therapy pioneer, very well known in the family therapy field, of course. He's a structural family therapist, born and raised in New York and from Puerto Rican heritage, both parents Puerto Rican. His work spans across 4 decades, initially with the Meninger Clinic, and then in the Philadelphia Child Guidance Clinic. He's been an educator for over 30 years in Masters of Family Therapy programs, and currently he's an associate professor at Drexel University, program of couple and family therapy. He's in private practice. He's been in private practice since 1976 and continues to do so. He's conducted, of course, many presentations, training, and presented at conference, including as keynote speaker across the world, in Europe, South America, the United States, Asia. He was awarded a doctorate, honorary doctorate, for his extensive contribution to the field of family therapy. And of course, he's been highly influential and transformative work with his students and therapists, and best known for his development of the person of the therapist model, which I'm very, very glad that he created that. And he transformed with it the lives of the students and therapists' skills. He was able to strengthen those skills in those, and of course, in turn on the clients themselves, including myself as a therapist and as an educator. That's been extremely helpful in my field and my work, personally and professionally. So thank you so much, Harry. So welcome very much.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Beautiful. I'm really very appreciative for you to actually share this moment with us. Okay, so as I was saying, COVID has impacted us in so many ways and across the globe in a diversity of ways, multi-layer ways. And of course, it's impacting communities and societies with unemployment, of course, illness, there's been deaths, loss of human lives, loss of livelihood, separation from families as well, due to the government measures. It's been remarkable. It's been amazing, the surmountable amount of impact that has impacted throughout the world, and of course in Australia included. So I guess my discussion with you, my conversation is about trying to see how has that happened in your side of the world, in the United States, of course, knowing that you're Puerto Rican as well. So perhaps some of that, because I myself, I'm Peruvian. I was born in Peru and live in Australia for the past 36 years, I think. While I've been living here for many years, and my experience has been here of COVID, but I've been getting in touch with of course, with people in Peru, my own family and relatives, and seeing the impact and devastation there. And of course, I've had a whole lot of conversations with a whole lot of colleagues and friends of mine and relatives and colleagues of mine who've worked extensively throughout the years. And I've seen the impact has been greatly, of course, and we're able to collaborate in a paper as well with a few of those. And of course, I was very interested to hear about you, Harry. So I guess my first question, my first curiosity is about the biggest impact in your context. What has that been like? And where you live, of course, and what has happened? So how has that affected you professionally, personally?
Well, what it has done, I think, not just where I am, but everywhere else, is that it has separated people.
Yes.
We cannot socialize the way we used to socialize, uh, and we people, for example, are prohibited from going to some of the uh, homes where they have their elderly parents, and a lot of those institutions don't want people from outside to come in because the elderly people, some of them are ill and vulnerable, and they don't want them to catch the virus. So they they end up having to wave at each other from the windows, which is very sad. Uh,
Yes.
but that's basically what's happening everywhere else, because people are staying away from one another in general. Okay, the younger people are less likely to stay away from one another, but generally, it's isolating people
Mm.
in society. So that what I also point out, though, is that there's a positive side to that, I think, which is that families then are more likely to stay together. Sometimes they can't go to work outside the home, so they work virtually on the computer. So that husbands, wives, children aren't going to school. Many of them, they're doing their schoolwork on the computer at home. So it gives the family a chance to be at home and not separated by work and responsibilities outside. Okay, so that's a potential positive.
Mm.
Okay, but generally it has created a lot of stress. I think, as you know,
Mm.
some people have lost their jobs, uh, and some people have not permanently, some people permanently, and that has a for people who don't have a lot of personal resources, that creates a lot of stress for them. And some people are struggling not to be evicted from their homes because they can't pay the rent,
Yeah.
and people can't pay their mortgage. Um, so it affects the people of lower income, more disadvantaged people. It affects them much more seriously than it does people who have resources, of their own,
Mm. Mm.
that that could carry over. So it, it 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 separates people. It creates stress, uh,
Mm.
and it makes for a less congenial environment, social environment for people. And I think also for some people who need support, because in this today's society, there are a lot of people who live alone. It's not as in the past where families were were more cohesive.
Mm.
But nowadays, families are not so cohesive. The people married, remarried, and children have several sets of parents
Mm.
in various locations, and so that kind of communication and connection becomes that much more difficult. If you
Mm.
had, a family that was always together, then that's easier for them. Okay, but in a society that is as as lacking community,
Mm.
and lacking strong families that last, forever, it becomes much more difficult because people have very much depend on communication and connection with one another, and so they resort to the computer, to the telephone, but it's not the same. You know, it's not the same as being, face to face with family. You can't even hug people these days
Right.
because people are afraid to touch one another. Uh, so it's in an unnatural environment, so that there's more stress in the environment because of it, and then there's also less support because people are not able to be that as connected as they were before.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, so there's a lot of similarities, I guess, throughout the world. There's some traces, some congruence in terms of the uncertainty, the stress, the
Mm.
mental health issues that occur. I mean, given the fact that the families are not as cohesive as they used to be, like you were saying, that makes it even harder, doesn't it? Um, and each nation, each country, each context has been impacted differently as well. There've been different themes in each of them, even though there's been the baseline has been very much, there's the uncertainty and certainly the fear, the panic, the disconnection, all those kind of things, and what relationships looks like and livelihood looks like. But there are certain differences depending on where we are at, and I guess that's my curiosity in terms of, I live in Perth, Western Australia, of course, like as they call it, the furthest part of the world, the furthest corner of the world. So then isolation, then we present a whole pile of things for us, which again is very much uh, relevant to our area and our context. Isolation means and signifies a whole pile of things for us. There tends to be more of that competitiveness. There tends to be more that. So in moments of chaos, there tends to be more different again. Like the response is, what do I do? How do I hide? Everyone for themselves, kind of thing. The survival of the fittest, that kind of idea. More so. So rather than uniting, while there has been uniting, but not necessarily in certain themes because of part of the responses as well, which we'll talk about it in a minute. And so I'm curious, of course, the impact personally to you, and of course, you being the developer, the person of the therapist, I'm sure that's a major aspect of that, isn't it? So in your personal experience, have you been impacted? How have you been impacted? And also professionally, what has that looked like in your work? Because you train, and I've seen you've been using a lot of, of course, these kind of platforms in order to communicate, to continue to train and provide presentations and I don't know whether through therapy as well you are doing that. I'm curious about what have you been doing? How have you been using the platforms, the alternatives as a result of COVID? And secondly, I guess my question is also, what are the things you have found in your practice and in your teaching and in your training?
Well, if you had asked me that question a few months ago, you would have gotten one answer. Today, you get a different answer, because when it first hit us, then the only means of communication was through technology.
Mm.
And particularly if you're going to be working systemically, sometimes with families that are separated, they can't come in, so then they're in different places. And you can't get, and it was more difficult to get them together in order to try to deal with the whole family. But what's happened over time is that an institution like the university, Drexel University, where I work part-time, where I teach part-time, the technicians there have become very important people.
Yes.
And but they've also become a wonderful resource. And so they've taught me things that I never thought I would learn about technology, and using different platforms, and connecting people from very separate places and seeing them all at the same time on one screen. it at this point now it's becoming second nature to me.
Yes.
Yeah, so that it's really not the kind of impediment that it was at one time. You know, and I'm also getting accustomed to trying to read people on the computer. You know, at first it was strange because I was accustomed to being very close to people and being able to observe body language, you know, facial expressions, as well as listening to what people were saying. But with time, I'm getting more accustomed to looking for cues on the screen, and I can see it, and so I'm making relatively good connection with people, including couples and families. So it hasn't had such an impact on me today as it did at the very beginning, you know, and it hasn't affected my caseload, the people coming in for me to see. Um, Although I still think that the disadvantaged poor, you
Yes.
know, who don't have the computers that I have and other people have, um, uh, they don't have, and if they do, they may not, they don't have the help with the technology as I have, so they're at a disadvantage in
Yeah.
terms of being able to use the technology that we have. So that I think many of us are getting used to using this technology, but I believe that a lot of people who are disadvantaged are really suffering more because they're more isolated as a result, because of they lack the resources themselves.
Mm, mm, mm. I can imagine that. And I guess so do you work extensively still with people with lack of resources? Because I know I've been one of the areas of your interest has been working with disadvantaged communities. So be with people from what we call in Australia cultural and linguistically diverse backgrounds. So you would call it, you know, from different cultures, different races. Is that still the main core of your work, or is that what you've been encountering, and what are kind of the issues that you're finding with that as well?
Well, you know, I'm not doing what I used to do in the past of going to homes
Yeah.
and seeing families in the home, or having large families coming into my office, because I work alone. I don't have excuse me. You know, I don't have backup staff, so I just work
Right.
by myself, and I also have to travel sometimes, so that I'm not able to see families in the way
Yes.
of people with disadvantaged families the way I used to see them.
Yeah.
Okay, what has happened is that um, a number of people, because of the impact of the economic impact
Mm.
of this pandemic, they've lost their jobs, so
Mm.
that I'm seeing a good many people without charge. You
Yes.
know, so I'm not going to drop them just because they don't have any income. Yeah,
Absolutely.
so so that I have a fair number of people who I charge very little or nothing to, that I would have charged more in the past.
And
Okay,
that's
but that's
interesting that
that's
you
the one
say that.
impact that it has had on me.
Yeah, because I'm finding this is what we are doing as therapists, as systemic therapists, you know, mental health practitioners around the world in talking to other clinicians, other therapists. We are encountering that. We are certainly either not charging at all or charging very little to some of those families, you know, that come to see us. Yeah, by all means. So would you say that the issues that they're coming to then are impacted heavily by the economic financial issues and the separation? Because in your side of the world, the the border measures, sorry, the government measures, in managing the spread, reducing the spread of infection. Um, do you feel that's also impacted heavily? Because that's the other part that I wanted to talk to you about as well. Because in Australia, for example, we are, as I said, we're quite isolated. And so one of the things is we are the biggest state in Australia, and the furthest from everything else. And so I find that so what's happening? So our borders were closed. There was a border closure. So we can't leave this state at all. And this has been, haven't had really new cases for a while. I mean, we just recently had a few, but really apart from that, there's been really very good outcomes in terms of that. So now the government measure approach has been to close the borders. So what we are encountering is also, so unemployment is the second highest in Western Australia. And also families rupture, separation is huge. And of course that very much impacts as family therapists, it's right in our realm that I find, and I see much more depression, mental health issues that I did before. Those people, because I see, I guess, the two ends of families and clients. I see both socioeconomic, and I see also the higher, the upper class families and couples, and I see both of them. And there's nonetheless the underlying uncertainty and fear. It's kind of like there's traces underneath it that are tinting whatever comes the layer above, and all the other issues come as another layer on top of that, and they are wondering what's going on here. And of course, for us, for example, in Western Australia, there's a mining industry, so there's FIFO, what we call fly in, fly out. And so what happens is that families are separated at times. They travel 2 weeks away, 2 weeks home, that kind of thing, different arrangements. So now, of course, they haven't been able to see their families, parents, children, parents. And so what we've been seeing, it's a lot of people losing their families and even not being able to be there for funerals. And it's been extremely scenes of really sadness and despair, family members not being able to be part of it because of the closures. So it's been quite full of that. That's the impact I'm seeing now. Whereas it's different, like what you said earlier, if I would have asked you a few months before, it would have been different at the beginning of COVID. But now things have changed and they evolve, haven't they? And throughout the globe. And for us, these are kind of the issues that are becoming more apparent. That's the family separation, and coming close to Christmas is a major impact in itself as well. So I'm sure that would be something that you are seeing quite a bit of as well.
Well, I think I don't think that it affects the people whose jobs depended on traveling, like salesmen who had to travel from city to city. So it's affected them, but I think it's mostly affecting adversely people who were already relatively isolated.
Wow.
So a lot of people live alone.
Yeah.
Of all ages in today's, at least in this society, in America, the relative isolation has then caused them to feel more stress because they don't have the support that they had before. They don't have the closeness. They don't have the stimulation, except through the internet. But it's really not the same. So they're the ones who are affected, more seriously. Also, people who are affected are it tends to be more women than men, in a sense, because more often than not, what I see is that the men continue to work, and then very often the women take off from work so they can take care of their children because the children aren't going to school,
Right.
and they're having to school the children at home.
Juggle
So,
many roles. Yeah.
yeah, so then the children are having their classes on computers, and the mothers stay home to help them and to coach them and to tutor them, and the men are going to work. So that adver ad adversely affects the women with their jobs, with the positions that they had. At least that's been my experience. So,
Wow.
um, the the it's become an unnatural uh, society. So what was natural is no longer natural, and
Mm.
everything has to be done, through virtually through technology, and you lose some of the intimacy that you had before.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Like you were saying, there's certain you lose a lot of the realness, the organic nature of working with people. And I guess training students too, because you're training soon to become therapists, and particularly with your pot model, for example, like it's about being there and being authentic and being true to self and using yourself as a tool, as an instrument in your therapeutic process, in making change, in creating change. And for example, with for example, in my experience, of course, I tend to work with culture extensively. So I use culture as a
Mm.
form of communicating that. Culture tends to come through. So those kind of things, and I guess you might have seen some of that. And I've been finding myself since COVID, I'm using more of your model ever than ever before, even more so. I'm strengthening that use because the use of self is the use of intuitive self and creative self. It's kind of putting the volume up more, I feel.
True.
That's what I'm finding in teaching, and of course we have a great deal of international students, and I tend to work with a lot of international students from different communities, Vietnam, India, Africa, and of course they are unable to leave Australia. They're also disconnected from their families, and so communicating through culture is an important way. If everything is under stress, they're kind of really, they're finding themselves speaking in English, and that's not their primary language. And
Right.
then they find, and then the stress, it actually feeds the stress and the
Hmm.
anxiety. The moment I introduce the ideas, how about, have you tried to speak in Swahili, or have you tried to speak in another, your native tongue and your primary language? The moment they do, it just shifts completely, and then the comfort comes in. It's quite fascinating.
Sure.
Um, so yeah, I'm sure you'll be finding these kind of things too. And I guess with the students that you have as well, in the trainees as well, um, and also I'm curious about what are the things that you feel, yeah, like in your students, are you finding any difference in terms of teaching, in terms of providing training to already seasoned practitioners, as well as students training to be practitioners?
Well, I'm going to give you the same answer I gave you before, which is, if you had asked me this question a few months ago, I would have said it had a great impact
Yeah.
because it was difficult to connect with the students. But at this point, we've gotten pretty good with the technology, and I'm able to have classes
Yeah.
with the students, and they're more comfortable with the technology than I am because they're in their 20s, and so they're more accustomed to using it. But
Mhm.
I'm getting pretty comfortable with classes with working with 2 or 3 students at a time, if I'm supervising them, or individual students, and um, it's becoming so natural that
Mm,
I'm afraid that once this is over, we're gonna be leaning on technology more than we were in the past, which to me would be a loss because I still miss the the person to person
absolutely.
presence, with another person. But
Yeah,
when it comes to the actual training,
yeah,
it's not much of a hindrance today as it
right,
was when it first started,
right.
because we're getting just much better at the use of technology.
Yeah. So technology has been a helpful resource for both as a form, an alternative way and platform within which to produce or to continue to provide training, teaching, academic teaching, and also, of course, therapy. So you are saying, so that's has been a bit of both. So it's a new way of working with that. And I'm curious about what do you think would be the repercussions that like the impact of working because people, like you are saying, they'll get used to working in the theme, and then you're losing the person to person contact and connection, face to face in the flesh, face to face, and what would do you think do you see the impact would be then, perhaps, and what would that impact would look like in terms of our field of family therapy, for example, what would be the legacy or what was left as a result of the pandemic?
I don't know what it's going to be, because when I first started to work with the technology, I was so conscious of the distance that we had. But what's happening is that I'm getting used to, as the way we're talking right now, I'm getting used to talking to people, on the computer online, and more and more, I'm able to make better contact with people than I
True.
was in the past because I wasn't used to it in the past, you
Yes.
know. So I still don't think it's not the same as having somebody face to face there, but I'm getting used to teaching, supervising, seeing clients online, and that's become pretty much second nature to me right now. Okay, but 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 I think I'm losing something in the process, but I don't know what it is, and I'll you
Cannot
know
quite feel it yet.
yeah, right. So
We're yet to wait.
yes.
Yeah, I can see that. And that's the thing, isn't it? The pandemic is doing that to us. It's kind of that feeling of, I kind of feel it. There is something different. I can't quite pinpoint what it is. There's something different. But as time progresses, you can have a bit more of a feel of it. But then things change again. So it makes it really hard to capture, doesn't it?
Yeah, because right now I'm beginning to forget what it was like to be in
I know.
somebody's presence. Okay.
Pre-pandemic.
Yes.
Yes.
So it begins to feel natural to me.
Yeah.
Uh, but I, my fear is that we're going to become more dependent on this kind of technology,
Yes.
and we're going to lose a little something of the intimacy that we had when we were in one another's presence.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, that's going to impact on how we do therapy with couples and families. And once we do, because for example, I'm seeing partly face to face. Some people still want online, so I can do it from home. So that's great. But
Right.
some people want to sit in my rooms, so I still sit them in my rooms, and my teaching likewise. Um, so that's the theme. But the themes and things that they come up with, um, it's quite interesting about meeting people. How do you develop a relationship? What does romance look like? How do you maintain relationship? How do in particular those relationships, like what that looks like? It's kind of like it'll be a foreign concept in I guess in months to come, in years to come, in terms of what that looked like before, pre and post pandemic. Be quite interesting. And again, the idea of when families are separated, for example, like in our case, it'd be really hard to kind of know, are they going to go again? Is there going to be another pandemic or another thing that I need to be fearful of that will stop me from doing that? It's quite interesting in our work. It'll be quite interesting what we find after the pandemic passes. If it
Yeah,
ever
you
does.
know, there are little things that are different. For example, you know, uh, if I'm meeting with a couple and the man gets a little bit tense, I could put my hand on his arm,
Yes.
and be reassuring to him. I can't do that now if I'm looking at a screen.
Yeah.
I have to do it with words and some gestures. It's not the same. I know I did some years of training therapists in Argentina,
Mhm.
and there, when they would come with children, the children would put their cheek for me to kiss their cheek,
Yeah.
and that was just a normal way of saying hello, you
Wow.
know. Uh, so there are little gestures
Mm,
that we're missing,
absolutely.
and now we're starting to get used to not doing it, you
Yes.
know. So I don't know what it's going to be like once this thing is over, and then
Mm,
we have to make the adjustment back.
yeah.
And I suspect that some businesses, even universities, are liking the idea that they don't have to build buildings and get more
Yes.
offices, and they can do things
Yes. Yeah.
via the internet. And so they may not want to go back to the
Yes.
way things were before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. I'm wondering whether I know we are talking about COVID, but perhaps the pandemic, corona pandemic, and I'm just curious and wondering whether you can give me an example of your model, the person of the therapist, and what would that look like, and the use of self, I guess, how you can do it. I know we've been talking about technology taking over the manner in which we provide service delivery therapeutically, teach, train, supervise, is taking the place for that in a lot of nations. I'm just wondering what the person of the therapist, what would that look like amidst COVID? Quite interesting.
Yeah. Well, you know, um, I mean, one example I can give you
Mm-hmm.
where I don't, I don't, I don't know that it made a difference, but I saw a family years ago, and the man had struck his son. He had punched his son actually in the
Oh,
chest, his
wow.
adolescent son, and he was very upset about that. And so he came with his family and
Mhm.
had several children. The adolescent boy was the oldest. Well, he was there with his wife, and he was telling the story of what had happened. And I wasn't really understanding what motivated him to hit his son. I really couldn't get to what was really deep there. And then he mentioned that his mother was sick, and then the wife and the children actually said, she's dying, she's not just sick,
Wow.
so then I opened that up to him, and then he got really deeply into what it was like for him to see his mother dying. He's adopted, so there was no father,
Mm,
so she was everything to him,
yes.
and I walked him through the whole experience and what it was like for him, and the fact that he didn't allow his family to support him, and they wanted to support him, but he was doing it all by himself.
Right.
And then and then as I then it occurred to me, I said, tell me again what happened with your son.
Mm,
Well, when his son, he was walking in the house in the hallway, and the son was arguing with the mother, the
mm,
man's wife,
mm,
and he was being very disrespectful. And so when this man came by and he heard his son doing that, he lost his control and hit him. And I said,
Um,
well, do you think that has something to do with what you're going through with your mother?
mm,
Oh, wow. So then, he saw it, and said, you're not allowing your family to support you. And so you're isolating yourself. So you're keeping all of this inside. And everything came out. So it was a beautiful thing. And then at the end of it, he said to me, he says, I don't know how you did it. He says, but you just walked me through everything. I was able to see everything. And I want to thank you for, well, then I said, then after the family left, so that I was with the audience that I was teaching, I said, my mother had just died 2 weeks ago.
oh,
So I was reliving my own mother's death and
yeah,
her sickness. And because of that, I knew what he was going through.
yes,
And I
absolutely.
could ask questions and I could draw things from him that I might not have thought of otherwise. That's a use of self.
Exactly.
Okay.
And
You
that's
know,
an organic use of self, because I'm
yeah.
sure through his suffering, you then connected with your own suffering. It just became presented to you perhaps. Were you aware that that was coming, or was it just
Oh,
there?
well,
Organic?
it just came to me because as
Yeah,
'cause I do that with my work all the time now.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
when I'm working with somebody and they're talking
yeah,
about their experiences,
yeah.
I go back to experiences that I had that are similar, and that helps me then to resonate with them, to get
Mhm.
a little closer to what they were experiencing. So and it was very emotional for me, because
Oh,
when I started to talk about it to the audience, I could almost, it was very hard not to cry, because it just happened. And so I
wow,
was talking about it, so it
very
was
raw.
very real, very immediate for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So very raw. And that was able to obviously create some comfort in them and understanding, knowing that their therapist was able to unite in humanity and
Right.
experience suffering and loss. What a powerful piece. That's beautiful. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing there,
Yeah,
Harry.
you're welcome.
I'm wondering, lastly, as I was talking about these stories, the underlying tones, I guess, that I feel is uncertainty, the undertones of uncertainty and vulnerability for people, right? Because of the uncertainty, the novel virus initially, now we know more about it, but the novelty about when do we end this kind of separation from families, when do we end these other ways of being, other measures and things like that, when is it all going to end, when we will come back to normal, if there will ever be a normal, how it was before. People tend to talk about the normal, whatever that was. And so I guess I'm just curious about, I guess, about your own personal story of survival. If you can share something of survival or vulnerability that comes to mind for you, if that's okay to share.
Well, it's what it has meant that I have had to make more of a conscious effort
Mm,
to connect with colleagues.
yeah.
um, because in the past we would naturally be seeing each other in the hallway at the university, and we would be sitting in the same room, going through a conference. Um, but now I have a whole list of telephone numbers and email addresses, and so I have to, consciously say, oh, I should be talking to this person, I should be talking to this other person. So it you know what's happened is that, as I said before, what was natural is not natural anymore.
Mm,
We're having to, it's a new kind of natural
yeah.
that we're doing now, and we have to get into new habits of connecting with each other that we used to just take for granted in the past, and then there's always a certain limit as to the degree of intimacy that you can have with your friends when you're using, you know, this computer that we have right now. Um, it's different when you're working professionally with clients, but when it comes to people who are family or close friends, you can't get a hug, you can't shake hands, you know, uh, you feel the loneliness, you know,
Yes.
and I think everybody's having to
Yes.
deal with that.
Yes, absolutely. So that's a major part, isn't it? The loneliness being the level for all of us. I mean, throughout the world, I guess, clients, therapists, everyone, we can share that experience that of loneliness and separation to a certain degree as well. We cannot travel, we cannot attend conferences, we cannot go. You cannot come and visit us to Perth, Western Australia. I hope that will happen though, sometime
No,
soon.
I just got an invitation to be a main speaker at a conference in the Netherlands. But I said, you know, if you want me to do it virtually, I can do it, but I cannot go there, you
Yeah.
know. So
Yeah, exactly.
that's
Not
what
for
happens.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So hopefully we will be able to send you an invitation for a conference here, because I'm part of a committee for a conference too. So you'll be able to come over here and see us. It'll be amazing. Harry, I'm deeply appreciative of your time. I know your time is very valuable. You're very busy and writing and everything's so busy as always. So I'm most appreciative of your time and your wonderful example as well, this story, that case study that you shared as well with that family. I was deeply touched by that. Really appreciative. All the best, Harry. Thank you so much. And thanks for your amazing work with the person of the therapist too. I deeply value your work and contribution.